For 3 years, he came to her cafe every Tuesday and Friday at exactly 7:30 in the morning. The same table by the window. The same order. Black coffee and whatever day-old pastry she had left from the previous day. He paid with exact change counted out slowly from a worn leather wallet. He never spoke beyond please and thank you. Never made eye contact. Never lingered longer than necessary. Sarah Martinez thought he was just another lonely old man trying to make his small pension stretch. She had no idea that the silent customer who sat in the corner booth reading yesterday's newspaper was once the most classified person in America. She had no idea that feeding him day-old muffins and treating him with basic human kindness had put her on the radar of people who monitored threats to national security. But on this cold Tuesday morning in November, everything was about to change. Because 5 black SUVs with government plates were pulling up outside Sunrise Café, and the men stepping out weren't there for coffee. And in that moment, as Sarah stood rooted to the floor, the old man quietly rose from his seat for the first time before finishing his coffee. He adjusted the faded olive-green jacket draped over his shoulders, gave her a long, steady look, and nodded. It wasn't a goodbye. It was permission. Within seconds, 2 agents flanked him, one handing Sarah a sealed envelope marked eyes only. He asked that you read this when he's gone. One of them said quietly, "You've done more for this country than you'll ever understand. Welcome to the silent ranks." Before we dive into this incredible revelation, tell us in the comments from which city in the world are you watching this video today. And if you believe that small acts of kindness can change everything, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're sharing stories that prove how treating strangers with dignity can lead to the most unexpected connections. Sunrise Café sat on the corner of 5th and Maple in a neighborhood that had seen better days. The paint was peeling from the exterior walls. The neon sign flickered when it rained. The linoleum floors were worn smooth from decades of foot traffic. But the coffee was strong, the prices were fair, and Sarah Martinez treated every customer like family, whether they could afford to pay full price or not. Sarah had inherited the cafe from her grandmother 5 years earlier. She could have sold it, taken the money, and started fresh somewhere else. The neighborhood was slowly gentrifying. Property values were rising. Developers were making offers almost weekly. But this cafe was more than a business to Sarah. It was a legacy. A place where working people could get a decent meal without breaking the bank. A community gathering spot where everyone was welcome regardless of their circumstances. She opened at 6 every morning and stayed open until 8 at night. 14-hour days, 6 days a week. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest work. She served construction workers heading to job sites, office cleaners finishing night shifts, students stretching their meal plans, elderly customers on fixed incomes. Anyone who needed a warm place to sit and a friendly face to greet them. Most of her regulars were talkers. They shared stories about their families, their jobs, their hopes and frustrations. They asked about her life, offered advice about everything from cooking to dating to running a small business. The cafe hummed with conversation and laughter and the comfortable noise of people who knew each other well. But not him. Not the old man who had been coming twice a week for 3 years without ever saying more than a dozen words total. His name, according to the signature on the checks he occasionally wrote, was Robert Mitchell. Age somewhere in his 70s. Thin build, average height, silver hair, always neatly combed. He wore the same rotation of 5 or 6 shirts, all clean but showing their age. His shoes were polished, but the soles were worn thin. His hands were steady but marked with old scars that suggested a life of physical work. Sarah had tried to engage him in conversation countless times. Asked about the weather. Commented on news stories from the paper he read so intently. Inquired about his health when he seemed to have a cold. But he always responded with the minimum necessary words. A nod. A brief smile. A quiet thank you. Then back to his newspaper and his coffee and his studied silence. Other customers had theories about him. Mrs. Peterson, who came in for lunch most weekdays, thought he was probably a retired factory worker whose wife had died and left him with nothing but memories. Tony, the construction foreman who grabbed coffee every morning before heading to job sites, figured he was former military based on his posture and the way he kept his back to the wall. Jenny, the night shift nurse who stopped by for breakfast after her shifts ended, suspected he might be dealing with depression or some form of trauma that made social interaction difficult. Sarah didn't speculate much about his background. She was too busy running the cafe to psychoanalyze every customer. But she noticed things. She noticed that his clothes were always clean despite showing wear. She noticed that he read every article in the newspaper, even the obituaries. She noticed that he tipped exactly 15%, calculated to the penny. She noticed that he always chose the table with the best view of both the front door and the back exit. Most importantly, she noticed that he was hungry, not just for the coffee and pastry he ordered, but genuinely food insecure. She could see it in the way he ate slowly, making each bite last, and how he sometimes hesitated before ordering as if calculating whether he could afford it. In the way his clothes hung a little looser each month as if he was gradually losing weight. That's when Sarah started the day-old pastry tradition. Technically, she told him they were leftovers from the previous day that she needed to move before they went bad. In reality, she often baked extra items specifically so she would have something to offer him at a discount. Muffins that cost $3 became day-old specials for $1.50. Croissants that normally sold for $4 were marked down to $2. Danish pastries, cookies, scones all suddenly became yesterday's inventory that needed to be cleared out. Robert never questioned the coincidence that there were always day-old items available exactly when he came in. He simply paid the reduced price, nodded his thanks, and ate slowly while reading his paper. Sarah suspected he knew what she was doing, but appreciated that he never made her acknowledge it directly. It allowed both of them to maintain their dignity. Him as a paying customer, her as a businesswoman moving inventory. The routine continued for 3 years. Tuesday and Friday mornings. 7:30 sharp. Same table, same order, same quiet ritual. Sarah grew protective of him in a way she couldn't quite explain. When other customers tried to take his table, she would gently suggest they sit elsewhere. When new employees asked why the old man got special treatment, she would explain that longtime customers deserve consideration. When vendors delivered supplies during his usual time, she would ask them to keep the noise down so he could read in peace. She began to look forward to his visits, even though they rarely exchanged more than basic pleasantries. There was something comforting about his consistency, something reassuring about his quiet presence. In a world that felt increasingly chaotic and unpredictable, his routine provided a small anchor of stability. Robert seemed to feel similarly. On the rare occasions when Sarah was away from the cafe on Tuesday or Friday mornings, her employees reported that he would sit at his usual table for a few extra minutes as if waiting for her to appear. When she returned, she would always find exact change left on the table for his usual order, even though he hadn't actually been served. But on this particular Tuesday morning, something was different. Sarah noticed it immediately when she unlocked the front door at 6 a.m. Robert was already waiting outside, which had never happened before. He was usually precisely punctual, but never early. He stood near the newspaper box, shifting his weight from foot to foot, checking his watch every few seconds. His usual composed demeanor seemed cracked around the edges. When she let him in, he nodded his thanks, but didn't go to his regular table. Instead, he approached the counter directly, something else he had never done. "Sarah," he said, using her name for the first time in 3 years. His voice was rougher than she remembered, as if he hadn't spoken aloud in days. "I need to tell you something. But first, I need to ask you a favor." She looked at him carefully, noticing details she had somehow missed before. The way his eyes constantly scanned the street outside. The slight tremor in his hands that wasn't from age. The careful way he positioned himself with his back protected and multiple exit routes visible. "Of course, Mr. Mitchell," she said. "What can I do for you?" He was quiet for a long moment, as if weighing words he had been rehearsing. When he spoke, his voice carried a gravity that made her lean forward to catch every word. "There are some people who might come looking for me," he said. "Official people. If they do, I need you to know that everything you've done for me these past 3 years has meant more than you can possibly understand. You've been kind to a stranger without expecting anything in return. You've treated me with dignity when you had no reason to. You've fed me when I was hungry and given me a place to belong when I had nowhere else to go." Sarah felt her chest tighten with worry. "Mr. Mitchell, are you in some kind of trouble? Is there something I can do to help?" He shook his head slowly. "You've already done more than enough. More than I deserved. I just wanted you to know that before they get here." As if summoned by his words, the first black SUV pulled up to the curb outside. Then the second. Then the third, fourth, and fifth. All with government plates. All with tinted windows. All disgorging men in dark suits who moved with the precision of people accustomed to handling sensitive situations. Sarah's first instinct was to step between Robert and the door, to protect him from whatever threat these men represented. But Robert placed a gentle hand on her arm. "It's all right," he said. "I've been expecting this. I just hoped I'd have more time." The lead agent entered the cafe first. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of bearing that suggested military background. His suit was expensive but understated. His eyes swept the interior, assessing threats and exit routes exactly the way Robert's always did. "Good morning," he said to Sarah. "I'm Agent Harrison, FBI. We're looking for someone who may frequent this establishment." "Robert Mitchell." Sarah looked at Robert, who nodded almost imperceptibly. I'm Robert Mitchell, he said, stepping forward. No need to involve the lady. She doesn't know anything about why you're here. Agent Harrison studied Robert carefully, as if comparing him to a photograph or description he had memorized. Mr. Mitchell, we need you to come with us. There's been a development in your case. Case, Sarah repeated. What case? What's going on here? Agent Harrison glanced at her, then back at Robert. Ma'am, I'm afraid that's classified information. But I can tell you that Mr. Mitchell is not in any trouble. Quite the opposite, actually. Robert looked confused for the first time since Sarah had known him. I don't understand, he said. My handler told me the program was indefinite, that I should maintain my cover until further notice. Agent Harrison's expression softened slightly. Sir, the program ended 6 months ago. We've been trying to locate you to bring you back in. Your handler retired and apparently didn't pass along your location to his replacement. We've been searching for you using your known aliases and last known addresses. It wasn't until yesterday that we traced you to this neighborhood. Sarah felt like she was listening to a conversation in a foreign language. What program, she asked. What are you talking about? Agent Harrison looked at Robert again, who nodded slowly. Mr. Mitchell was part of a federal witness protection program, he explained. A very specialized one for individuals whose testimony was crucial to national security cases. He spent 15 years in hiding under an assumed identity while we built cases against some very dangerous people. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. 15 years. Federal witness protection. National security. She looked at Robert, seeing him clearly for the first time. You're not really Robert Mitchell, she said. He shook his head. My real name is James Patterson. I was a senior analyst at the Defense Intelligence Agency. 15 years ago, I discovered evidence of a conspiracy involving foreign agents and high-level government officials. My testimony helped convict 12 people of treason. But it also made me a target. The program was supposed to keep me safe until all threats were neutralized. Agent Harrison continued the explanation. Mr. Patterson's identity was so highly classified that only a handful of people knew his real location. When his handler retired, the information should have been transferred to the new team, but there was a communication breakdown. We've been looking for him for months. Sarah felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what she was learning. The quiet man who had been coming to her cafe for 3 years was a hero. Someone who had risked everything to protect his country. Someone who had given up his entire life, his identity, his connections to family and friends to serve a greater good. But more than that, he had been alone, completely isolated, cut off from everyone he had ever known. And she had been his only human connection for 3 years. The only person who had shown him kindness. The only place where he had felt like he belonged. James, she said, using his real name tentatively. Why didn't you tell me? He smiled sadly. I couldn't. The rules were absolute. No contact with anyone from my previous life. No discussion of my background. No relationships that could compromise my cover. But I never expected to be in the program this long. I never expected to become so attached to this place. To you. To the routine we created together. Agent Harrison was checking his watch, clearly eager to conclude the conversation. Mr. Patterson, we have a debriefing scheduled at 1400 hours. There are some loose ends to tie up, some paperwork to complete. And then you're free to resume your normal life. We can arrange for transportation to anywhere you'd like to go. Help you reconnect with family members. Provide financial assistance for transitioning back to civilian life. James looked around the cafe, taking in details as if he was trying to memorize them. The worn linoleum floors. The flickering neon sign. The smell of coffee and bacon. The table where he had spent so many quiet mornings reading newspapers and trying to feel human again. What if I don't want to go anywhere, he said quietly. What if I want to stay here? Agent Harrison looked confused. Sir, you're free to live wherever you choose. But surely you want to reconnect with your family. Resume your career. Get back to your real life. James was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was firm but emotional. This is my real life. This cafe. This neighborhood. This woman who fed me when I was hungry and treated me with dignity when I had nothing to offer in return. I've spent 15 years in hiding, waiting for permission to live again. But I discovered that I was already living. Right here. With people who accepted me without knowing anything about my past or my accomplishments or my value to national security. He turned to Sarah. If you'll have me, I'd like to keep coming here. Tuesday and Friday mornings. Same table, same order. But maybe we could talk more. Maybe I could tell you stories about my real life. Maybe I could be a real customer instead of someone hiding behind a fake identity. Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from a profound sense of connection. For 3 years, she had been caring for someone without knowing why, following an instinct that told her he needed more than coffee and pastries. He needed human connection. He needed to feel valued. He needed to know that someone cared whether he showed up or not. "Mr. Patterson," she said, "James, you'll always have a place here. And I'd love to hear your stories. All of them." Agent Harrison was still holding his briefcase, clearly uncomfortable with the emotional turn the conversation had taken. "Sir, we still need you to come with us for the debriefing. There are procedures that must be followed before you're officially released from the program." James nodded. "I understand. But I'll be back. Friday morning, 7:30 sharp. Will you save my table?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Always." The debriefing took 6 hours. James answered questions about his time in hiding, confirmed that his cover had never been compromised, provided details about any suspicious contacts or unusual incidents. The agents were thorough but respectful. They understood that he had sacrificed 15 years of his life for his country, that he deserved to be treated with dignity and gratitude. When it was over, they offered him everything: transportation to anywhere in the country, financial assistance to start over, help reconnecting with family members who thought he was dead, counseling services to help him readjust to normal life, a new identity if he wanted one, protection if he felt threatened. James declined most of it. He accepted a modest financial settlement enough to cover his basic needs without worry. He accepted help getting his real identity restored so he could open bank accounts and apply for jobs under his actual name. But he didn't want to move, didn't want to start over somewhere else, didn't want to pretend that the past 3 years hadn't been the most meaningful of his life. He returned to the cafe that Friday exactly as promised, 7:30 sharp. But instead of his usual isolated silence, he sat at the counter and told Sarah about his real life, about growing up in Ohio, about his career in intelligence analysis, about the conspiracy he had uncovered and the courage it had taken to come forward, about the loneliness of witness protection and the way her simple kindness had kept him sane. Sarah told him about her grandmother who had built the cafe from nothing, about her struggles to keep it running in a changing neighborhood, about her dreams of expanding the business while maintaining its character, about how his quiet presence had become one of the anchors of her routine. They talked for hours that morning, making up for years of silence, sharing stories they had never been able to tell, building a friendship that had been growing invisibly for 3 years. Word spread through the neighborhood quickly. The FBI visit had been noticed by several people. Speculation ran wild about who Robert Mitchell really was and what kind of trouble he might have been in. Sarah didn't share details about his background, but she made it clear that he was a good man who deserved respect and privacy. The other regulars embraced him gradually. Mrs. Peterson started including him in her daily weather commentary. Tony began asking his opinion about current events, clearly impressed by his knowledge of international affairs. Jenny appreciated having someone else who understood the importance of reading newspapers thoroughly. James began volunteering at the cafe during slow periods. He had decades of organizational experience and a gift for streamlining operations. He helped Sarah modernize her inventory system, negotiated better deals with suppliers, suggested menu changes that increased profits while keeping prices affordable for working-class customers. More importantly, he became the cafe's unofficial greeter. His years in intelligence had taught him how to read people quickly and accurately. He could spot troubled customers who needed extra kindness, identify potential problems before they escalated, make everyone feel welcome while maintaining the safe, comfortable atmosphere that had always defined Sunrise Cafe. 6 months later, James proposed a partnership. He wanted to invest his settlement money in expanding the cafe, not to change its character, but to secure its future, to ensure that it would continue serving the community for decades to come, to create jobs for people who needed them and maintain a place where everyone was welcome regardless of their circumstances. Sarah accepted gratefully, not just because she needed the financial help, but because she had found in James something she hadn't realized she was looking for: a partner who understood the importance of what they were doing, someone who valued service and dignity and treating people with respect regardless of their social status or economic circumstances. The expansion doubled the cafe's seating capacity. They added a small kitchen that allowed them to serve full meals, not just coffee and pastries. They hired 3 additional employees from the neighborhood, including 2 veterans who had been struggling to find work. They established a program that provided free meals to anyone who couldn't afford to pay. But they kept James's original table exactly as it had been, reserved every Tuesday and Friday morning from 7:30 to 9:30. Not because he needed to sit alone anymore, but because it reminded them both of how their partnership had begun. With small acts of kindness. With seeing the dignity in every person. With understanding that you never know who might walk through your door or what their story might be. James never fully explained to the other customers what his background was. He didn't need to. They knew he was someone who had served his country in ways they might never understand. Someone who had sacrificed more than they could imagine. Someone who had earned the right to quiet, peaceful mornings reading newspapers and drinking coffee surrounded by people who cared about him. The cafe thrived under their joint management. It became a model for other small businesses in the neighborhood. A place where community members looked out for each other. Where veterans found employment and support. Where elderly customers received respect and companionship. Where working families could afford good food served with dignity. But the real success wasn't measured in profits or expansion or community recognition. It was measured in the friendship between two people who had found each other at exactly the right moment. Sarah, who had needed someone to believe in her vision. James, who had needed someone to remind him that he was more than his secrets and sacrifices. Sometimes heroes don't carry weapons or wear uniforms. Sometimes they carry coffee pots and serve day-old pastries to strangers who need more than food. They need connection. They need dignity. They need someone to see their worth even when they can't see it themselves. Sometimes the most important intelligence isn't classified or related to national security. It's the intelligence to recognize when someone needs kindness, when a small gesture can make an enormous difference, when treating someone with basic human decency can change the trajectory of their entire life. James Patterson had spent 15 years protecting his country by living in shadows and maintaining silence. But he discovered that the most meaningful protection came from Sarah Martinez, who protected his dignity by treating him like family, who fed him when he was hungry, who saved his table when he needed a place to belong. This story was brought to you by the Silent Ranks. Before we leave you today, here's our question. Have you ever known someone who never asked for recognition but deserved more than anyone else? Someone who served others quietly without expecting anything in return? Someone whose small acts of kindness created ripple effects they never knew about? Tell us in the comments about the unsung heroes in your life. The people who showed up consistently, who treated strangers with dignity, who created safe spaces where everyone felt welcome. And if you believe that kindness matters, that small gestures can change lives, that everyone deserves to be treated with respect regardless of their circumstances, hit that subscribe button to support our channel. We're building a community that recognizes heroism in everyday actions, that honors service in all its forms, that believes in the power of human connection to transform lives. Thank you for watching. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being part of a movement that sees the extraordinary in ordinary moments. We'll see you in the next story.